Good afternoon, students. And today we're in week 4. Can you believe that we are halfway done with our literature class? I think that time really flies when we're having fun. So in week 4, we're going to wrap up our unit on fiction. And so this week we're going to read about longer stories with a twist at the end. So if you want to be a good writer, it's always fun to write a story with a twist. In other words, if you write a story where you go against stereotype, or you go against reader expectations, then you have yourself a great story. So the two stories that we are going to analyze this week is The Lottery and the Lottery by Shirley Jackson, and The Story of an Hour by Susan Chopin. I think that's the name. And so when you write a story with irony or with a twist or with an unexpected ending, you really get the reader going. And so in The Story of an Hour by Chopin, in it, the character is a woman, and she's sitting by the window. She spends a lot of time in her room, and then she finds out that her husband has died, and she's overjoyed. Can you believe a wife that's overjoyed that her husband has passed away? And so for that whole hour, she is so happy that her husband has passed away, because now it means that she's free of his controlling, the way he behaves. And now she could do whatever she wants, that sort of thing. And then at the end of the story, an unexpected twist happens. She's so shocked. And then you got to read the rest of the story, and I'm not going to say the rest. But it's a great twist. But I think that this story illustrates just how little rights that women in the early 20th century had. For in the early 20th century, women could not own property. Very few were allowed to hold a job, and mainly when a woman came of age, all the women wanted to get married and find a man, because that was the way for financial security. And only for women who could not find a husband, then those women would become secretaries, teachers, or nurses. And then in the early 20th century, if a woman did not have a husband, she was called old maid or spinster, or looked down upon. So and a lot of the early stories written by women in the early 20th century had women dying of suicide or something as the only way to escape the tyranny of their husbands. And these are women that are well off. They're married to doctors. They're not minorities, but still they live a life in which they have very little rights. They're considered the property of their husband. And so when you read stories like Yellow Wallpaper or The Story of an Hour, those are the two I think that's in your book. And that's all written within the same time period where women had very little rights. So that's why when Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who also lived more or less was the end of that period, of this early period, and she fought for women's rights. In her lifetime, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she helped establish rights for women to have more rights. I didn't look it up, but I just know that when she went to when Ruth Bader Ginsburg went to law school, she was looked down upon, and she was, I think, the only female. So that's why we should appreciate the rights that women have. These days, women can have jobs, and ideally, women are to be paid the same amount as men, and so on and so forth. But all of these rights were hard-won, and women have the right not to be considered property of their husbands, and so on and so on and so on, although more needs to be done. So some of the stories talk about the early 20th century and women's struggle for equality. Then in The Lottery, it's not about women's rights, but it's simply a story with an unexpected ending and an unexpected twist, where Shirley Jackson writes against stereotype. Because the stereotype of a bunch of people gathering together for a lottery is that everybody wants to win the lottery. Everybody is happy to be there. Everybody wants to be there, that sort of thing. But as you read The Lottery, you notice that the tone and the mood and the diction, it's nobody wants to be there. People make excuses not to be there, and people make excuses not to be drawn for the lottery. And so the reader is left wondering, what's going on here? I mean, isn't the lottery, you win a lot of money and everybody wants to win? Why are the people so, like, they dread being there or make excuses? And why is this one lone woman saying, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair? And then what happens to that particular woman will shock you. I won't give away the ending. And so within the end of the 19th century, many poets also liked to write poems with unexpected endings. And I can't remember the name of the poet off the top of my head. I should have researched this before doing the lecture. Oh well. But basically I remember the poem as being a young man is in a meadow. It's very calm, it's very sunny, it's beautiful, the nature. And the young man is lying in the meadow and enjoying the sunshine. And so the poet goes into great detail about the beauty of the meadow and the calm and peace that the young man is feeling. And it's not until the very end of the poem that you realize the young man is dead from war. And so it's totally unexpected, because you would think. And so that's one of the, so when you write a story, if you write against stereotype and you write against readers' expectations, you end up with a really good story. And the way you write a really good story is when you use elements of fiction, like tone, style, symbolism, diction, and allegory. So when I say tone, that means you set the mood of the story. So in the lottery, the mood is heavy and sad and gloomy. And then you make the reader wonder, what's wrong with these people? Why are they so unhappy to win money from a lottery? These people are crazy or something? So that was the somber tone, okay, that in Jackson's work. Style is like you build up the suspense until you get to the climax. So what kind of style is the style? I'm going to read off some examples of style. So examples of style is syntax, word choice, tone. In other words, what is the voice of the writer? Is it a happy voice? Is it a sad voice? It's just like tone and style and mood are all intertwined together to set the ambiance or atmosphere of the story. So is it a happy ambiance, atmosphere, celebratory, or is everybody gloomy as if they're going to a funeral? And in the lottery, you wonder, why do people are so like you dragging them by the feet to what's supposed to be a celebratory event, such as you're drawing the lottery of who wins the gazillion dollars. Okay, so that's tone. Okay, you can use tone, and it's also a kind of foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is when you give hints, when the author gives hints to how it's going to end. And so the somber tone of the lottery is the author's way of giving hints to the reader that there is going to be a twist. This is not what you think it's going to be. Not everything is not the way it looks. Okay, so here you got the somber tone and the foreshadowing. So those are also two elements we described before. As you read the story, you're going to notice a lot of peculiarities, why everyone is so reluctant to be part of this lottery. And then theme. Theme is like, what are the main issues that in other words, what takeaway lessons do we get from reading stories like the lottery? And so this will sort of give away the ending, but the theme, one of the themes of the lottery is the usefulness of outdated traditions. You have to read the story to understand, to put it all together. What do I mean by the lottery is an outdated tradition? Huh? But anyway, so this whole story, the lottery, is like an allegory. An allegory is a symbol. In other words, the entire story is a one big metaphor, one big symbol to teach the reader that we should get rid of obsolete traditions for which we no longer know the purpose of anymore. Just because somebody says, oh, we've always done this. Oh, and Grandpa has always done this. And no one even remembers who or why or what it started, then you should just get rid of it. Obsolete traditions can be harmful. Then you got to read the story to understand what that, so that's why the story illustrates. That's why when we write a story, we illustrate a theme. We illustrate a moral. We teach a life lesson to the reader. We teach a certain possible outcome. In The Handmaid's Tale, for instance, where the reproductive rights of women are totally taken away. So what kind of themes come out of that story? So every story has main themes that we have. So if you read something like The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and you learn this little girl wants so much to have blue eyes, blonde hair, and light-colored skin. Because when she goes to the theater, she sees that all the happy people in the movies are always light-skinned with blue hair and blonde eyes. And anybody else who looks and she's really little, she's about 7 or 8. It's not an adult. So she thinks that in order to be happy, she goes and asks her mother, when I grow up, when are my eyes going to turn blue? When am I going to be happy? Because I have to have those blue eyes, light skin, and dark hair, blonde hair to be happy. And so The Bluest Eye teaches the harmful effects of prejudice, racism. For instance, why can't somebody with dark skin, brown eyes, and fuzzy hair, dark hair also be happy? Why can't people with dark skin also be represented in the movies as being happy? And so this is it's also a tragedy. Okay, I won't tell you the ending of that one, but so it's a great story. You can find this one online. It's called The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. And this you can find online. And it's the length of a novel. I'll have to warn you. It's not a short story, but it's so sad. And so stories can also teach you life lessons. So that's what I mean by theme. Okay, so let me go through the words. Tone, I've just done. In other words, the ambiance. Style, which is the voice. Nostalgic, happy, sad, gloomy. Symbolism. Symbolism is when you write a story that has many layers of meaning. So just as we discussed earlier, is that when we become adults, and we bring our life lessons to each story so that everyone interprets the same story differently. And so authors love to put in symbols into their story. In other words, they put in extra layers of meaning into their story, just like The Bluest Eye, the extra layer of meaning. Symbolism is that of racism, the dangers of racism, and then what you can do to deter racism is to have more fairer representation, say in movies, and show children that anybody can be happy. You don't have to be blonde and blue-eyed to be happy. So that there's symbolism, and a symbol can be an object, a person. For instance, in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, what does Alice represent? What do the different characters represent? And so, Lewis, you would have to read an analysis. So basically, it's like a fantasy land. And so when you write fantasy, you can even make it even more abstract in order to create symbols. And like I already discussed, as I give this example for the literature essay over and over again, that in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy represents innocence, the Tin Man represents heart, good heart and love, while the lion represents courage. And so then this week, you'll think about, what does the lottery represent? How is the author trying to engage the reader? And what is Shirley Jackson trying to teach us? And that's why when you read the summaries and the analysis, this is what other people have interpreted for their analysis. So when you write your literature paper, you don't have to take other people's analysis word per word. Try to have your own analysis based on your experiences. Now you can read other people's analysis just to understand the story more. to learn about other perspectives. But then when you write your literature essay, don't just regurgitate what other people have said. Instead, try to come up with your own interpretation based on your experiences, because that's what makes a literature essay or a reader journal interesting for the teacher anyway to read. I don't want to keep reading about some cliff notes. And if each student is assigned to, say, find the symbolism in the lottery, and I just read Spark Notes 1, Spark Notes 2, if all the students decide to go and look up Spark Notes, I end up reading Spark Notes through 30 students, which, by the way, is very boring. So what I would prefer is each of you have your own unique perspective, and then you just read Spark Notes to help you develop your perspective. So if you're a Latino American, you come at the story from that point of view. If you're Asian American, you can come with it from that point of view. If you're female, you can come with it from that point of view. And so on and so on. You're from the South, from New York, from whatever. But I want to see something original, and I don't want to see Spark Notes all the time. And also another thing is, don't spend your entire essay writing the plot of the story. You can write the story, the plot, only as the first 5 sentences of your intro. And then the rest of your essay has to be your interpretation of what you think the lottery, or also I think we have there's a short story list, and you can choose from all of those short stories, and then you bring your interpretation to those stories. Okay, so I already posted that list. And that list was created by the school. So it wasn't actually, I didn't personally create the story list, but somebody at the school, the class designer, chose those stories for you to analyze and for you to interpret. And so that way, if each individual student brings her own interpretation to the story, that makes it much more easier and fun for me to wade through 30 essays about that subject. So I went over tone, style, symbolism, which is the extra layers of interpretation, extra layers of meaning that an author writes to the story. Diction. Diction is similar. So here, let me read some examples of diction. Diction combines tone and style. So diction, usually when you say someone has good diction, it means that someone has proper speech. Someone has proper English and can speak in a certain accent, mainstream accent. Okay, so diction would mean tone, voice, style, character, attitude. And the different kinds of diction that you can see in a story would be, you could have Gothic, Romantic, classic, language in a story. You could have formal language in a story, diction. So diction means how we speak, our social register. For instance, when I give these lectures, I try to keep my English free of slang. I try to inform you. I have a more professional, in other words, diction is kind of just like the ambiance and proper English, formal English. It's the way we speak. In other words, we pay attention to the way we speak, and we pay attention, just like in week 3 of English 101, that was diction, in which when you write, you have to be aware of your audience. If you're going to write to, and I know that the one student who's in my class, who had my class before, said, and I would say, when you write to friends and family, we don't use we can use first and second person case, but when we write to our boss and our teacher, then we use formal English, third person case. That's diction, okay? When I said that over and over again in my Professor H writing channel, that's diction. In other words, the proper use of formal English and informal English. And in stories that you read, authors will deliberately put in lots of informal English or incorrect English into their characters' speech in order to show the regional dialect of that story. Flannery O'Connor was very famous for doing that, so that she would replicate the regional accent that she grew up with and stick that into her story in order to give her story a more authentic feel of that part of the country. I believe it was the Midwest. And so here you have, so that if I wanted to write a story about my family, I could use the diction like this to show you. Okay, in Chinese, if I wanted to say ni hao ma, ni hao ma means how are you? Okay, and that's mainstream Chinese accent, but that which is boring. But if I wanted to write about my family, and I have family in the South, and they don't speak like that. They speak Chinese, get this, with a Southern Texas accent, which does not exist in China, okay? So it's unique to them, and they'll say, "Nei, hao ma," or something like that. I'm trying to stick in, "Hey, y'all," into my Southern accent on top of Chinese, which is unique to them. So if I were to write a family story about my mother's side of the family, I would put in that strange or unique Chinese accent, because it does not exist in China, in order to give and that's diction also, in order to give my story that authentic feel. Because when you write a story, you want the reader to experience what you experienced, and the more detail you can put into it as an authentic language or diction, just for the character, it's just for your character, so that as you read the story, you would have one character who didn't have much education, for instance, who would say, "You is a bad person," or something like that. And then you have someone who's all stuck up and uses a lot of techno garb that nobody understands. That's someone who's way too educated. So that's the way in which you use word choice and syntax in order to illustrate your character, in order to move your story forward. That is diction. And so that is how you take into account your audience. If I'm going to write a family story, that I'm taking into account that my audience has no clue what Chinese sounds like normally, and then it has no clue what a Southern Chinese accent sounds like. So I would have to take into account my audience. So that is diction, in which you deliberately would use you go out of your way to recreate a certain kind of informal or overly formal language. So it's like ambiance, but with words, but with words and language. And so you can use diction to indicate social register. Social register means if you're talking to your boss, if you're talking to your family. So if I talk to my boss, I'm not going to say, "Hey y'all, what you doing?" or whatever. And then to my family, I could say, I would let my hair down, that sort of thing. So that's diction. Okay, so that's enough diction. And I already talked about allegory. The difference between allegory, like I said, is if the whole story is a symbol, like the parables of Jesus. When Jesus told his stories, I think one story Jesus told was, he said that the way people listen to God, and then he used the parable of mustard seed. If the mustard seed, okay, I'm paraphrasing, so I hope that but you get the idea. I'm just teaching what is allegory and metaphor. So if I'm a little off on my mustard seed story, forgive me for that. But basically, if the mustard seed falls on hard ground, it means those people are not listening to Jesus or listening to God's word. If the mustard seed falls on fertile ground, okay, and blooms, that means those people are listening to Jesus, listening to God's word, and flourishing. Okay, so that is an example of that entire. He actually wrote and talked about an entire story, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but and that's known as a parable. And so a lot of parables are allegories in which the whole story is one symbol, versus a metaphor. So let's say I tell a regular story, but then I just use one symbol within a story. If I use just one symbol within a story, that's known as a metaphor, a simile. You don't say simile, personification. Let's see, a simile is like, it is like, get it? Don is as big as a house. Don's body size is like a large horse. Or Don eats like a horse. Or Don eats like a whale. So whenever you say like a, and you make a comparison from one person or one thing to another, and you use something is like a something else, that's a simile. If I don't use like, and I say Romeo and Juliet, you're Romeo, and you're standing outside of Juliet's balcony, and you're in love with Juliet. Juliet and the sun, she's standing on the balcony, and the sun hits her face, and you look up to Juliet, and you say in a very romantic way to Juliet, Romeo talking, Juliet, you are my sun. That sort of thing. You are my heart. That is a metaphor. I don't use like, I don't use, and I'm not talking about the entire story being one symbol. So an allegory is when the entire story, like parables with Jesus, teaches one, and that would be the prodigal son, that I think we're doing. Okay, is that this week? Yeah, so prodigal son is also an example of an allegory. And then you can go look it up as to exactly what that entire, so a lot of the stories in the Bible are allegories. So that's how you can, in other words, they're supposed to teach a life lesson, and the entire story is a symbol. Versus a metaphor or a simile in which you just have a regular story and you just use one symbol as just as a describer. In other words, to describe a person or describe a thing, that sort of thing. So that's the difference between yeah, John eats like a pig. Yeah, okay. And so here that would be a simile, and John is a pig. That's a metaphor. That's the difference. Okay. So you're just describing a character being, eating too much. And what else? Oh yeah, Animal Farm. I can't remember the author's name. That's really bad. But Animal Farm has a lot of metaphors, and I would even say that the entire book, Animal Farm, is an allegory of society, of capitalism versus communism, and the hypocrisy and lying of human nature, for instance. That's an example of how, it has talking animals, if you like, that sort of thing. So authors can use allegory, metaphor, simile to add layers of meaning to their story in order to engage the reader. And so what makes literature interesting is how the author makes so much effort to engage the reader. And then you, the reader, then you interpret the story based on your life experiences. You get to empathize with the character. You get to live that character's adventures. You get to see the world from that character's point of view. You get to walk in someone else's shoes. And as I said in previous lectures, you get to live, you get to walk in someone else's shoes. And Confucius says that true wisdom comes by being able to walk in someone's shoes for just an inch. And in French, being in someone's skin. Okay, that's I'm translating. It's the same thing as walking in someone's shoes, but the French would say d'être dans le peau de quelqu'un, meaning to be in someone's skin is the height of empathy. Okay, so every language has its own way, but that's what's great about literature, is the ability to give us the window into either the past or the present. And that's why a lot of ethnic authors write about their immigrant experience in order to teach people what it is like to be, a first generation Chinese immigrant, or a first generation Indian immigrant, or a first generation anything. And that's what I love about literature. That's why I love to read, to escape. I just wish I had time to read an entire library, and that sort of thing. So I hope that I covered everything. I'm going to give some more, I'll read some more examples so what I just said, so that I remember everything so symbolism is a device featured in allegory in order to represent and communicate deeper meaning. In other words, extra layers of meaning in the story. Allegory is an entire story as a symbol, while symbols occur in non-allegory work. So I just explained how a whole story is a symbol versus a metaphor is just describing one person or one aspect as a symbol. A theme. A theme refers to the deeper central meaning of a written work. Central biblical themes is the struggle between good and evil. Pagan religion in the Bible is seen as evil, while belief in God alone is seen as good and holy. And so these are the common themes in the Bible. And common literary themes include coming of age, revenge, courage, love, redemption, mortality, human versus nature, which is like Old Man in the Sea. I can't read my writing. Okay. Isolation. Power. Okay, that's what I wrote. Power. Courage. Quest. Individual versus society. Faith versus doubt. Chaos versus order. Gender roles. And so those are all common literary themes in Western literature. And then different kinds of heroes. Okay. You could also have for instance, in Peter Pan, it's about do you ever want to grow up? So that's a common theme for Peter Pan. Mulan, girl soldiers are cool. So here even Disney has come up with some. These are all Disney stories. Peter Pan, Mulan, Cinderella. Inner beauty is rewarded. Pinocchio, you've got to tell the truth. Everybody knows that one. The Little Mermaid, okay, she transforms herself, gives up her entire sea life existence for her human prince. So then the life lesson there is love requires sacrifice. But the thing is, the Disney version of The Little Mermaid is a happy ending in which she gets the love of the prince. But in the original story, the Little Mermaid dies. You know, she just dissolves into all of these frothy bubbles, and then the prince I don't remember, I just remember that it's a tragic ending. And the life lesson there is maybe you shouldn't give up so much of yourself but that's up to each person. See? So I would have to think, what would be my interpretation? I can't just do it off the top of my head. But I think that I would not give up everything just for that prince. That would be my interpretation. Other people might say, hey, I would. And so that's what makes literature very, very fascinating. And then, so it's how the author, okay, to round out this week 4, so how the author engages you, the reader, and makes the story and add extra layers of meaning to the story is a central element of good literature. And then how you interpret the literature based on your life experience is also key to enjoying good literature. So the key to understanding good literature is being able to interpret the story based on your life experiences. And then the key to enjoying literature is to be able to analyze and see everything from a different point of view, diverse perspectives, that sort of thing. So I'm reaching the end of this particular lecture, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this whole unit on fiction and prose. Next week, we are going to start and do for 2 weeks. For week 5 and week 6, I'm going to talk about poetry. Now, many people think poetry, oh, that's so difficult. But really, poetry is part of our everyday lives. Really? Poetry? People will say, yeah, as soon as you turn on the radio and listen to music, you are listening to poetry, except it's poetry sung to a melody. So on that note, okay, I will end, and then my next lecture will be about the beauty of poetry and poetry from different countries. Interesting, and interestingly, poetry also, just like with literature, is represented by different cultures. So is poetry. So I hope that you enjoyed our brief foray into prose. And so I also posted in the forums the Norton Anthology of American Literature. And you just click on the book covers, and you're going to get all the American literature from before 1865 and after 1865. And Norton Anthology has the best collection of American literature. Also, Norton Anthology also has the best collection of poetry. It's called the Norton Anthology of Poetry. Now, I haven't been able to find a link online for that one, but you can easily procure that book, anthology, at Amazon. Actually, you can procure all the books at Amazon, for that matter. But, or at the LAPU bookstore. You can also do that too. Norton, and every English major has heard of Norton Anthology. Just ask any English major. So, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. And let's see if and I really enjoy doing all of these videos for you, and I hope that you get as much enjoyment out of these videos as I do making them. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me.